If you feel like producing a song takes you forever and you're spending weeks or even a month or longer on one song just to feel like it still doesn't sound professional, I'm gonna help show you that it's not because you're slow, but instead it's because you don't have the right systems, mindset, or tools in place to make decisions faster. And in this video, I'm gonna be giving you the keys to the kingdom to help you stop wasting time, make more music, and at the same time, actually get better faster. After teaching nearly 2,000 music producers all over the world in the past nearly 5 years, one of the biggest challenges and complaints I hear from amateur producers is that it takes too long to make music. I hear things like, it takes me forever to make a song, I get stuck and I can never finish, I have a hard drive full of ideas but it takes a month just to make one of them, or I never know what to do next and get stuck, and on and on. But the thing is that what we found is these are almost never because you're actually, quote, a slow producer, but instead it's because you lack the tools, the skill set, workflow, and mindset to make good decisions faster. So let's get into how you can tap into your creativity while getting the limitations out of the way. I'm gonna break this down into 3 main components that you have to have down in order to do this. The first component to this topic, your tools. You will take longer to produce music if you do not know how to use your tools and how to maximize your tools. Your DAW should be working with you, not against you. If you're struggling to know how to do simple and basic tasks within your DAW, that is going to slow you down. And if you can learn the fundamentals of your tools, then this alone will make you significantly more efficient. Let me just give you an example here. I'm currently in the process of learning how to use Studio One. This is not my primary DAW, I typically use Logic Pro, and since this is a new piece of software, you had better believe it takes me longer to make music than when I'm using Logic. And my music is simply not as good because I don't know where everything is, which creates limitations and friction. The more friction there is from an idea to implementing that idea, the longer it's going to take and the harder it is too. I immediately lose time simply because I don't know where everything is, I don't know the key commands or shortcuts, I don't know the ins and outs of Studio One, so naturally it takes longer, and this should not be a surprise to anyone. Yet I see all the time where producers are fighting with their DAW and they don't know how to do simple and basic things, and then they're complaining that it takes them forever to produce a song. Like, yes, of course it does, because you're wasting hours trying to figure out how to do simple tasks. So the solution to this is that you need to spend dedicated time learning your DAW. This is not the most fun thing in the world, and trust me, while I'm learning Studio One, I honestly kind of hate how slow I am, and I don't enjoy having to stop to take time to learn the software because I just want to make music. But it's actually a bigger waste of time for me to ignore that learning process and just barrel through trying to make a song instead of taking that hour to really make sure I understand the software. There is no shame and nothing wrong with having a dummy project that's only there to help you learn the tools. And information around how to use virtually every digital audio workstation is free. There are tutorials and you can even use ChatGPT to help. Yes, I said it and I stand by it. ChatGPT can be an incredible tool for learning new software. So let's dig deeper on your tools now that you know how to use your DAW, because many of you already know how to use your DAW fluently, and there are so many juicy things that you can do to become an efficient producing machine with your tools. Let's start with this. If you're constantly starting with a session that looks like this, then I'm just gonna say it, you have wasted probably an hour. And to be truthful, I am guilty of this one because sometimes I really like starting with a blank session, but it's also a royal waste of time because we have these things called templates. What if instead I can click one button and 50 tracks are already set up with all my favorite sound libraries and channels I need? Well, that, my friends, is called saving a lot of time. You can make your own custom templates that are filled with your favorite sounds, audio tracks already set up to record, and even your processing set up so things are sounding nice right out of the box. This means you're not starting from scratch every single song. Instead, you can pull up sounds as soon as you open your DAW to start working on your song instead of digging around trying to find something to start with or building out your session. It's so simple, but it's so effective. You can make different templates for all the different types of music you make. I have one for TV writing sessions I get called on, another for big cinematic music, and others for various types of projects I work on so I can get started without wasting any time. Especially as a professional with deadlines, this is so important for me. This leads me to the second way you can maximize your tools. Favoriting sounds and cataloging your samples and patches will save you time and make you produce music faster, period. If you don't know what sounds you have, don't know where they are, and don't have a method for favoriting them so they're easy to find, you're gonna waste a massive amount of time. Now, in order to do this, you do need to spend time up front on sound exploration, which, by the way, I highly recommend to every producer, regardless of anything else we talk about here, because you need to know what sounds you have available. If you're digging into new sounds on every single session, and every song is like going fishing with no idea what you even have in the lake, no wonder it takes you forever to make music. There is no way to produce music efficiently without knowing what sounds you have before you start a new song. When I start a new song, I know exactly exactly where to go for whatever vibe I'm working in, and that is because I know my sounds. I know where they are, and I have it easy to find. There are many ways of cataloging your sounds. For me personally, I spend time pretty much once a month exploring new sounds that I've never used. I favorite them in my libraries. There's usually a little star for favoriting your presets, and then I make mental note of where they are and what I would use them for. You might need a more rigorous cataloging system, like making patch folders. Again, this is where you can actually use something like ChatGPT to help assist you in coming up with a structure that works for you, not just for me. There definitely is not just one way of doing this, but if you don't go searching for sounds before you make music, then you can't be complaining about it taking you a month to make a song. Because half the battle is sound selection. The next way you can become a producing machine is by using effects presets that work on your specific projects. For example, I have vocal presets that get me 90% of the way there with a single click of a button. You can see here that I don't have a ton because I personally don't need a whole lot of these, but I have one called, Aggressive Nathan, another called Closer Quinn, and other vocal presets that I created for specific vibes, specific artists, or even for specific albums that I've worked on. And most of these are usable with several different vocalists as a starting point. Now, I rarely drop a preset and just call it a day. I almost always tweak and make adjustments based on the song. Presets are not meant to be just drag, drop, and forget. You usually need to adjust them. But presets can take something that might take 10 minutes and strip it down to 1 minute instead. And when you stack that up over time and over a large number of tracks, that saves you an enormous amount of time. Saving presets is incredibly simple, so if you find you're always using the same vocal chain on your vocals, then why on earth would you not just save a preset to reuse? And by the way, the Logic Pro presets that they have for their vocal presets are absolutely trash. Please don't use them. They're terrible. You're better off making your own. But in Logic, you can just go to your settings on the channel strip, down to Save Channel Strip Settings As, and then just name it, save it, and you're literally done. Don't view presets as cheating, and instead view them as saving your time, helping you make faster decisions, and helping you speed up your creativity. I'm not saying that you should use presets on everything, but with vocals as an example, I think it's very helpful to use if you're feeling like it's slow going. This brings us to another part of tools that's really important, and especially a time killer for amateur producers: plugin overload. This is a real thing, and yes, there is such thing as trying to use too many plugins, and my big encouragement to you is to simplify your process. If it takes you a long time to make music and you're really slow, then the last thing you should be doing is adding more complexity to your situation. Complexity demands more thought and more time, period. So if you're struggling with slow music making, why on earth would you throw something else into the mix that's gonna add complications and as a result, add more time? That doesn't really make sense. Let me just show you a finished session of mine so you can see how simple my setup is and show you that you do not need to be using tons of plugins to get killer sounding production. All right, so just as a very quick example here, this is a track that has well over 70 tracks, and ready to see how many plugins I use in total? Here we go. This right here is my vocal chains, which by the way are based on presets. But let's look at the instrumental. Look at this. Look at this. Look at how many of these tracks literally don't have any plugins whatsoever. You're gonna see lots of plugins I use over and over again. Effect rack, right? Realm. But you can see, look at this, no plugins. 1176. And then these are just all of my buses right over here, which is like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like 5 effects buses total. And you can see this is the entirety of it. And this is a song that is out on Spotify right now that you can go listen to called Supernatural. And by the way, I also literally filmed making this song entirely from scratch if you want to check that out. So you tell me if this sounds okay or not.
Oh, I'm stuck here chasing demons while the world is sleeping, having happy dreams and thinking you're so safe and all alone.
As you can see, I'm not trying to use a ton of plugins. I'm trying to use the right plugins. And most pro producers have their go-to choices, and so should you. You realistically only need maybe 2 or 3 plugin options for each type of plugin to be able to knock out incredible quality, if that. 2 different types of compressors. I could do every single one of my mixes with a 2A and 1176. If that's all I had, I could absolutely mix basically everything I do. I could get away with a single EQ, maybe a second one if I want a vintage EQ. The point here is that you don't need to have 15 different EQs and 25 different compressors. And by the way, if you are doing A/B comparisons of the same compressor type, but just a different brand, just don't. That is one of the worst things you can spend your time on unless you just have a weird, bizarre obsession. The Waves 1176 and the Native Instruments 1176, they're gonna sound pretty much identical because they're emulating the same thing. Stop and think about why you make music. Do you make music just so you can turn a bunch of knobs, push a bunch of buttons, or do you make music because you want to make, well, Music. I hope you're in this to make music. And the tools are just tools. So the whole point I want to hammer home with this section is to focus on knowing your tools, knowing your DAW, knowing your sounds, and simplifying your process. When your tools are working with you and not against you, that alone will immediately get your time back to make music faster, and none of those are hacks. Those are genuine ways to improve your efficiency. This brings us to the second big component of working faster and more efficiently so you can stop taking a long time to make music. If you got the tools down, you got them working for you, then it's time to move on to this second part. And this gets us into the real heart of the problem. You need to self-evaluate. You need to ask probing questions to identify why you are taking a long time to make music. Because I can obviously throw a bunch of tips at you, but if you don't even know why it takes you so long, that's problem. When we have conversations with our students, we ask lots of questions, and those questions typically uncover problems. The question that you need to be asking yourself first is quite simple. Why do I feel like it takes me a long time to make a song? I obviously cannot answer that for you, but we hear answers like you struggle with analysis paralysis. In other words, you can't make decisions. You don't know which plugins to use, so you end up testing all of them. You get hyperfixated on one thing, and next thing you know, it's been an hour. You're trying to make every section perfect before the song is done. You feel like you're just messing around instead of actually having a clear-cut goal. You're watching more tutorials than actually making music. You get stuck feeling like you can't find the perfect sounds. You spend an hour on a song and looking back and feel like you've literally done nothing. That list can go on, and I would guess some of those might resonate with you. But you need to do some soul searching because typically there are underlying causes for why it takes a long time, and it's not just your tools. And it might be that you are just a beginner and still in that very early learning stage, in which case, yes, everything we talked about in this first section, that's incredibly practical and you need to do that. But the reality is that most of you watching, you've been producing for at least a year, and if you've been producing for a year, there is no reason why you cannot produce music significantly faster. A lot of producers have mental barriers to making music efficiently, and there can be a lot of reasons things take longer simply because of what happens in our mind. For example, I know many producers have it in their head that it should take a long time. Like, after all, we are making art, and art is supposed to take a long time, right? Well, that's a problematic view because sometimes songs happen very quickly. I might only spend 5 hours on a track and it sounds incredible. So should I intentionally take longer just because I feel like it's supposed to take longer? That doesn't make any sense. There is no badge of honor given out for taking a long time on a song. Sometimes songs happen quickly and sometimes they don't. There are times when a song requires a massive amount of time, not because I'm incapable of working quickly, but because the song has a lot of live instruments that need to be tracked, which will make it take longer. Like, I found that anytime I record live strings on my music, it easily adds 40 to 50% more time on the production because I have to write the parts, notate, edit notation, run those sessions, I have to comp and edit, and then I have to move on to the mixing portion. So don't get it in your head that every song has a time limit or a time requirement. You need to disconnect the amount of time from the song, because a lot of times when I write songs, the best songs happen really quickly, and then the ones I actually spend a ton of time on actually kind of end up not being that great. How funny is that, right? But you need to search in yourself, because what we find over and over again is that there are usually mental barriers and mental beliefs that lead to slower workflows. As creatives, we can honestly be a bit masochistic. Like, in other words, we can sometimes almost find this bizarre enjoyment in the struggle and pain of making music. And I 100% understand that, because sometimes I'm like that too. Sometimes fighting through a challenge is amazing, but don't assume that means you should always be fighting or struggling or taking a long time. If you're constantly struggling all the time, that's not normal. That's not normal. That brings me to one of the most powerful mental barriers that we find producers struggle with: perfectionism. And I can hear some of you already say, Nathan, I know I'm a perfectionist, just don't tell me about it, leave me alone. Perfectionism, simply put, is not healthy. Plain and simple, especially when you're still not making professional quality music. When perfectionism is helpful is when you already have a very strong skill set and you have a very strong knowledge base, because you know where you can be perfectionistic and where you shouldn't or where you can't. But you don't know what you don't know when you're still learning. So if you're being a perfectionist, it's not gonna go well for you. Perfectionism is the enemy of efficiency and is the enemy of finishing. So many of you are thinking that if you just spend more time or just try a few more sounds or tweak this thing just a little bit longer, then you'll somehow reach that perfection. And I can assure you that is almost never the case. Part of the reason I know this is because art is never perfect. What even is perfect? There is no such thing as perfect music or perfect mixing or perfect productions, right? There's only stylized music or stylized mixing or creative choices or creative decisions. Yes, There are standards. But when the rubber meets the road, you and I will almost inevitably approach creative projects completely differently, and that's a good thing. It's not a matter of perfect or imperfect, it's different. I'm not suggesting there are not black and white aspects of this music thing. There are definitely things you can do wrong objectively, but as you become an expert, it becomes pretty gray, and it becomes entirely about creative choices and not factual choices. You might think the sound you pick isn't good enough, but it might actually be good enough, but it's just that you're allowing your brain to trick you into second guessing yourself. One thing I notice whenever Andrew and I run our producer challenges, where we each produce a song from scratch in 5 days with only an hour and a half of work each day, is that both of us basically never second guess ourselves. And this is one of the main reasons why we can confidently run these live challenges on camera with a live audience and know that we're gonna produce something sounding pretty great. It's because we recognize that perfectionism is, in some ways, not real. It's a lie, because perfect music doesn't exist. So instead, we learn to be comfortable with making decisions and living with them. I promise you that in 6 months, you will look back on what you made today and say, wow, like I really wish I would have done XYZ thing differently. And you may very well think that that changes when you reach that new level, but I promise you, it doesn't. Even now, after all these years doing this, I still look back on music I made even 6 months ago and I'm like, I could have done X different and that would have worked better in that case. My most streamed song is a song I wish I could do over again. Yet I hear all the time how many people love that song. So don't think this just goes away. It's actually a beautiful part of being an artist. Stop seeing this as a bad thing. Every piece of music we make is a snapshot of who we are in that moment. And as we learn and as we grow, we look back in hindsight and think, wow, I've grown. How amazing. Don't look at this as a negative thing. This is a good thing. My whole point in this whole section is that you need to self-assess and self-analyze and have some self-awareness. I find that so many producers are not willing to look themselves in the mirror and be honest about where you're at. Be bold enough and courageous enough to look at yourself honestly and ask those hard questions, because so many of you are capable of making way more music than you are, but you're currently telling yourself lies and are not willing to look inward to ask those questions and then do something about it. And that leads me perfectly, or imperfectly, differently, creatively, into the third component of this. What do you do now that you know your tools and now that you have self-assessed your own mental barriers? Well, this is where we can get extremely practical with 5 specific things you can do right now that will help you produce more music faster than you thought possible. Number 1, understand Parkinson's law. Nathan, what the heck is this? I thought you said practical. Hold up. Trust me, Parkinson's law is this. Work expands to fill the time you give it. If you give yourself a month to make a song, it's gonna take you a month to make a song. If you give yourself a week to make a song, it's gonna take a week to make a song. This is why deadlines are so powerful. You need to give yourself clear-cut deadlines. And the best way to do this, set a timer. I recommend working in 60-minute batches. Set a physical timer, like an actual timer on your phone, or even grab a kitchen timer. Set it for 1 hour and force yourself during that time to get as much done as possible. During this time, you're going to explicitly reject perfectionism. Hear me and say it with me. Reject perfectionism. Make as much progress as you possibly can with the time you have. When you give yourself a time limit, you will limit the time you waste. You will limit your decisions, and you will limit your distractions. Put your phone away, put social media away, work for 1 hour, and when you're done, I think you'll be pretty amazed at how much you can actually get done when you force yourself to work within a specific amount of time. And if you've done everything we talked about in this video so far, mind blown. Remember, work expands to fill the time you give it, so stop giving yourself all the time in the world. One of our producer developed students went through years of ruts not finishing music, but in the first month of working with us, we gave him the task of holding himself accountable and finishing. Not only did he do that, but he released that song and got 50,000 streams in a month. That's after not having finished a song in years. So set a time limit and stick with it. Number 2, create a vision before you start. I cannot overstate the importance of knowing what you are going to do before doing it. Imagine if you pulled up a piece of paper, right? You're gonna make a drawing and you say, I have no idea what I'm gonna draw, and you just start scribbling all over the page. You think that's a good way of making a picture? I hope you say no. Like, instead, a good artist is gonna visualize what it is they want to make, and then they're gonna make it. Producing music is very much the same. Now, will we perfectly make what's in our head? Probably not, but if you have nothing in your head, then I guarantee you won't make something you like. When I start a new song, I put in actual time to think about what I'm trying to do. What sounds do I need? What vibe do I want? What kind of rhythm does this section of the song require? How am I going to develop the song? What's the biggest part of the song? What's the smallest part of the song? Are there specific things that I need to require special treatment? I'm going to ask a ton of questions so I can craft a vision. You need to craft a vision first and then execute that vision. You cannot expect to produce something efficiently if you cannot first have an idea of what you want. Find references and other examples to lean on to help you come up with ideas. A big part of my job when I'm producing artists is to be the person with the vision. And that's such an overlooked aspect of producing music. But if you start with a vision, it becomes a lot easier to hit the bullseye. Number 3, work in phases. If we drew a diagram showing how you work, would you be, bouncing around like a monkey hopping from one tree to the next? Or would you be methodical by tackling specific issues one at a time? So many producers are working almost like ADD. I'm recording a guitar over here, and then the very next thing, all of a sudden I'm like mixing the drums, and then all of a sudden I'm like editing something, and like all of a sudden doing this thing, and all of a sudden I'm like checking my phone. Like wait up, that is not efficient. Allow yourself to be immersed in the process and work heavily in phases rather than jumping from one thing to another. This does take discipline because as creatives, I think we have this tendency to want to hop around, but it will make you work faster. If you're working on the creative part of the project, like building arrangements and picking sounds, then don't pull yourself out of that zone just because something distracted you. Focus on making the song in phases. Do all of your arranging together. Do all of your recording together. Do all of your mixing together. Whenever I work, I always map out the vision. I'm gonna start with sound choice and arrangement, then I move on to recording everything with MIDI first, and then I have to replace those MIDI parts with real instruments. I'm gonna do that next, and then I work on editing, and then I work on mix prep, and then I work on mixing. I actually have a specific process that I follow to ensure that I'm not getting swept away into random things, and I work in chunks and phases to make sure that I'm being efficient. Number 4, know when to move on. This is possibly one of the most crucial mistakes that producers make. When you feel resistance in a moment, do you push through and just try to force it? Most of you do. Most producers get stuck and you're banging your head on the desk over and over and over and over again trying to figure it out. Friend, you can stop doing that. Please stop doing that. Here's what to do instead. Move on. The moment I feel resistance, like I don't know what to do, or I'm thinking like, man, I feel kind of stuck here, I just move on. And I don't just move on. Instead, I'm gonna move on to a part of the song I feel like I know 100% for sure what to do. Momentum is one of the most underrated things in music production. When the momentum is on your side, you probably know this by the way, you better ride that wave. And when you feel resistance slowing you down, you feel that friction messing up that momentum, move on to where you can get that back as quickly as possible. If I'm feeling stuck, why would I ruin the moment? Why would I waste the time when I know that I can move on to something else that needs to get done and I can do it right now with no resistance? What I find is that when I feel stuck, I will almost always come up with ideas that aren't as good as if I just wait. If I try to force it, it's not gonna sound good. But if I wait and come back later, guess what? I come back with a fresh mind, a clean slate, and then I can tackle that problem. This actually happened in the most recent producer challenge we did. There was a whole section of the song where I was like, I have no clue what to do with this. So did I spend an hour trying to figure out what to do in that moment? Nope. I left it alone and knew I could come back to it another time, and that is exactly what I did. I moved on, came back the next day to figure it out, and came up with a really fun idea that I loved. We're gonna have to come back to this. I don't want to waste too much time on that. When you feel resistance, that is your mind saying, move on. So next time, you should listen and move on. Number 5, master the if I could only do one more thing technique. When you make music, you're going to reach a point where you finish something and you got to move on to something else, like we just talked about. But how do you know what to move on to? This is where producers get stuck too. Too many choices, too many things need to get done, so how on earth am I supposed to decide? Well, ask yourself this simple question. If I can only do one more thing and I have to shut it down, what would make the biggest difference right now? Sometimes we need to whittle it down. Otherwise it can be really overwhelming because there's like 100 things that have to get done. So if you have the choice between editing some audio or recording a new part, which of those do you think is gonna make the biggest difference right now? Probably recording the new part. Think of like, if you could only do one more thing and then show it to someone who's never heard the song right after, what's the one thing they would actually notice? Are they gonna notice the little edits that you did here? Or are they gonna notice the new guitar part that you recorded? Or the new drum part you recorded? Or the new piano part that you recorded? Probably that. Sometimes you're far enough along that there isn't just one thing that's super noticeable, but you get the idea. When we simplify our choices, we make better choices. So keep it simple and ask yourself this question when you don't know what to do next. I promise it'll save you a ridiculous amount of time. And now you might be thinking, which one of Nathan's videos should I watch next? Well, I actually made a whole video showing you how to produce killer quality music every single time, go into ridiculous detail, showing you practical techniques. You can watch that video right here.